Hello, and thank you for joining me today. We will be reviewing a PowerPoint training presentation on how to conduct the point in time count. So today we'll be covering the purpose of the PIT count. And when I say PIT count, PIT stands for point in time count. So we're going to be reviewing the purpose of this PIT count, why the PIT count matters, what the PIT count will tell us. We'll be reviewing what you will be doing on the day of the count, and then we'll finish up going over next steps and reminders. I'm going to start by reviewing the purpose of the point-in-time count. The Department of Housing and Urban Development requires this point-in-time count to be completed of every homeless person in the United States during the last 10 days of January. These unsheltered counts are currently required every other year, and the counts are happening all over the country. They must be organized in this manner in the last 10 days of January to minimize double counting. The PIT count is important for a number of reasons. It increases the community understanding of homelessness. It enables counties to retain and improve funding for homeless services by meeting federal data reporting requirements. This methodology that we will be reviewing today and that you will be participating in on the day of the count is a method that has been approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In addition, the count generates valid and accurate data regarding individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the community. And then lastly, it links homeless data collection efforts to national and local strategic program and policy planning. So what we're doing here in the county is also connected to data that's being collected nationally. So the PIT count includes a few different components that I'm going to review here. The middle box, which is the general street count, that is what this training is reviewing and what you'll be participating in. But just so that you get a better sense of the overall project and what it entails, we wanted to show you this diagram. You'll see there's a shelter count, and that's conducted on the evening of January 26th. So that's where we work with all of the shelters in Marin County, and they report to us how many individuals stayed with them on the night of the 26th. And then the second box is the general street count. So that goes on early morning of January 27th. That's what you'll be participating in. That's where we send out guides and volunteers into the field to collect street count visual data information. And then later on in the day, we have a youth count, and that's also conducted on January 27th. It's just a little bit later, and that is because the data and research that we found shows that it's best to count this youth age group, which is under 25, in the later afternoon times. And then third and final, we have a survey component. So that is conducted in the 2 to 3 weeks following the census, and that's where we send out homeless individuals into the field to conduct surveys. It's a 2-page survey, front and back, that we take a representative sample based off of the amount of people we found in the street count. All right, so now it's time to review the definition of unsheltered homelessness. So I'm going to read through the definition in a minute, but first I just want to go over and review the fact that this might come off as somewhat of a limited definition. So I want to remind you that the PIT count is one of many different strategies that the federal department uses to understand homelessness and allocate funding for services. Though it is limited, the reason for this is because we are able to focus on a specific population with specific needs, and that will then enable us to have a better understanding of this population and provide funding for them. And just remember that this process is just one piece of the puzzle. So the definition, I'm going to go ahead and read it word for word. It's the Hearth Act definition, category 1, and it states that homelessness is defined as individuals and families who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including individuals and families with the primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not designated for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. I will go ahead and review this a little bit further in the next slide and what that means and what that includes and doesn't include. So here's this next slide that I was referring to. So some of the shelter accommodations that are included in the homeless definition would be makeshift shelters, people living on the streets, people living in vehicles, people living in parks or abandoned buildings, people staying on buses in bus or train stations, people living in airports, or people staying at camping grounds without paying for a permit. Some areas that are not included, and this is where I want to remind you of this somewhat limited definition so that you understand what you're looking for on the day of the counts. We will not be including people who are couch surfers, people who are living in double up situations. Double up would be where you have maybe a family of 8 or 9 people staying in a 1-bedroom house. So a house that's maybe meant for 2, 3 max, you have, up to double the amount of people that is meant to stay in that house. We're not including people in rehab or mental health facilities. We're not including most people staying in jails or prisons. And then we're also not including anybody awaiting eviction or foreclosure. So that's a little bit of a review of what to expect of what you're looking for on the day of the count. Here you see a couple pictures of some areas that would be included. This left picture would be an example of an encampment. So an encampment is an area that has at least 2 or more tents or makeshift shelters. And then on the right is an example of a bus station where you might find somebody sleeping and they would be defined as homeless. As I mentioned in the previous slide, individuals living in their cars are included in this definition. So this slide is meant to review how to tell if a car or a vehicle appears to be inhabited by a homeless individual. So you're going to look for signs of habitation in the car. So that would be fogged windows, maybe electrical connections coming out of the car, screen or window coverings. Oftentimes there'll be household items inside and outside of the vehicle, making it seem like more of a permanent living place. You might hear sounds of music or talking from the inside of the vehicle. And then sometimes there are some known safe parking locations or known vehicles by your homeless guide. So remember, we don't want you, and I'll review this a little bit more in the safety slides, but we don't want you to be going up to these cars or knocking on their windows to see or ask these individuals if they are homeless. Rather, we want this to be a visual count. So hopefully you can remember this slide and work with your homeless guide to determine whether a vehicle appears to be inhabited by homeless individuals or not. So some of the logistics of what to expect for this PIT count. Like I started to mention in the previous slide, the street count is a visual count of people residing on the street, in parks, in vehicles, in abandoned buildings, and in makeshift shelters. I want to emphasize the visual count piece. While you're out there in the field, we ask that you don't interrupt these individuals. They might be sleeping, they might be inside of a tent. We ask that you don't go up and talk to them. If they approach you and are interested in what you're doing, you're more than welcome to have a conversation. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're respecting these individuals' living accommodations and being respectful of their space. The street counts are planned while people are still in public shelters. That's why we head out there as early as possible. Like I mentioned before, this timing is important to avoid duplication. This earlier time is generally when individuals are still going to be in their shelters. So we can get those individuals from our shelter count, and then we have you guys out in teams to collect people who are living in unsheltered situations. If you have a map area that includes a shelter, we ask that you head to that area around the shelter first. A couple more logistics I want to review. Just a reminder that volunteers will not be paid for their time, nor will they be reimbursed for their mileage while out in the census tract areas. Homeless guides are paid $15 an hour, and that's for their expertise during the count, as well as for their time spent in training. Just a reminder that all homeless guides must have a 2017 PIT count referral card and a training attendance card in order to receive payment on the day of the count. Another reminder that all payments will be made when teams return to the deployment center on the day of the count. So payment for homeless guides attending trainings, as well as their time spent out in the field, will be received after they return with materials at the end of the count. This slide reviews a little bit of the timeline of what to expect on the day of the count. So at 5 a.m., we have the guides and volunteers assemble at their pre-assigned deployment locations. Then, as soon as you arrive, we'll have you fill out some paperwork. There's a sign-in sheet and a hold harmless agreement. In addition, we'll review some safety protocols, go over the data collection forms and the data quality standards. After that, we create our teams. So volunteers and guides are paired together. A reminder that there will be no volunteers under the age of 18. Then once those teams are created, we'll give each team their street count packets. This includes maps and data collection forms. You'll receive a clipboard and some pencils. You'll receive a copy of some printed training guidelines just to have with you out in the field that covers everything that we've reviewed here today. They will also give you a contact number in case you need to call anybody at the deployment center while you're out in the field. And then we will also have some stickers for you to wear while you're out in the field. Everybody leaves as soon as they have their maps and collection forms, data collection forms. There's a quick checkout and sign out process where we double check you have everything, and we also collect your contact information in case we need to be in touch with you while you're in the field. Then we ask that everybody is returning to the deployment center by 10 a.m. at the latest. You might finish up sooner depending on your map areas. Just come back as soon as you're done. Otherwise, we hope that you're back by 10 a.m. and we ask that you call us if anything, if you might think you need to be out any longer than 10 a.m. Here's a couple pictures of examples of what it will look like at the deployment center. Usually there's some coffee or snacks in the morning provided, and then some tables set up with all of the materials, and we'll have all of our volunteers and guides congregate in the middle, and then from there, once we review the safety protocols, we'll create the teams and everybody will be on their way. I wanted to review quickly the team creation logistics. So like I said, the volunteers and guides arrived at the deployment center. Then there's the review, like I mentioned, of the safety tips and count protocol. And then these teams are created of 2 to 3 people. Generally, this is 1 to 2 volunteers and 1 guide. The reason why I'm taking time to review this is because we want to make sure that everybody knows what to expect on the morning of the count. It's important that we have enough volunteers to match with our guides, and that also we have enough vehicles. So even if you arrive with a friend or a colleague, it's possible that you will get split up and be on separate teams. It all just kind of depends on who shows up on the day of the count and what our numbers look like. Once your team is created, you're assigned a map location. So I want to remind you that the entire county has to be covered. So that means not everybody's going to get a map that will be in an area that is likely to have a lot of homeless individuals, but it's our responsibility to send out teams to every corner of the county. The deployment center captain will manage this assignment process. Just so you know, some maps will be pre-assigned, but most teams will be created and assigned to areas on the morning of the count. So the reason for mentioning this is just because the logistics of creating the teams in the morning can get a little bit tricky. So we just ask for your patience and patience with us during the map creation process. And in addition, we try as best we can to get guides and volunteers headed to locations that they are familiar with, but sometimes we're unable to accommodate everybody. So we ask that you come prepared to help out in any way possible and help us cover the entire county. So next, I'm going to review the data collection forms. So the 2 important things that you're going to be going out in the field with are the maps and the tally sheets. So I have a few slides coming up that will show you what to expect. All right, here we have a slide that is a sample of one of the maps you will receive on the morning of the count. So it's a sample of Marin County Census Tract 1192.01. You'll receive this. It's printed out in color, large, so you can see all the street names. Depending on the size of your map area, it's possible that your team will receive more than 1 map. We try to make this as best organized as possible and send you with maps that are right up next to each other. So the reason I'm going to review this today is because I want to make sure that you understand what you're looking at. The census tract area is outlined in a bold red line. So this census tract means that you want to count and cover everything with inside that census tract, inside that red line. So there's a number of streets. We ask that you go up and down every single street and then work with your guide to determine when you need to exit your vehicle and walk around. Sometimes there's parks, there might be hilly areas, but these are areas that you are likely to find homeless individuals camping. So we ask that you work with your guide to determine when you need to check out those areas and when you don't. In addition to paying attention to the tract number and the map number, you also need to pay attention to the different colors within this red boundary. So here in this sample, you'll see on the top left, there's kind of a purpley color, and then the rest of the map is green. So I'll review this a little bit further in the next slide, but just to draw your attention to it, these represent different jurisdictional areas. So you'll have tally sheets that are connected with this census tract number. So it's important when you're in this map area, you use those tally sheets. And in addition, there'll be a tally sheet if you see somebody in the purple area, and then there'll be another tally sheet if you see somebody in the green area. So I hope that makes sense. Also, if you have more than one map, make sure that you are using the tally sheet that's correlated with this map. I'm going to review the jurisdictions a little bit more in a minute, but I hope this gives you a good understanding of what to expect your maps to look like on the day of the count. This is an example of what the tally sheet looks like. So in addition to your map, you will have this tally sheet. This is how you describe the individuals that you're seeing. In the coming slides, I'm going to go over and review some examples of what you might find. But for now, I just wanted you to see what this looks like. All these boxes on the top will be pre-filled out by us. That's for our coding purposes and to explain what this tally sheet goes with. But the boxes on the bottom, that's the area that you will fill out for individuals that you see. This slide is meant to reiterate the importance of paying attention to the different jurisdictions within your map area. Like I said, remember this sample that I showed a couple slides ago isn't necessarily what your map will look like. So you might have a map that has all one color, in which case you wouldn't have to worry about the different jurisdictions. However, many of our maps include multiple different jurisdictions on one map. So it's important that you pay attention to which tally sheet you're marking things down when you find an individual on the streets or in a park. A white area represents an unincorporated area, so that also will go on a different color tally sheet. So if you see somebody in the green color area of that map, you're going to check the tally sheet that has the right census tract number, and then also make sure that it says the green color, the correct jurisdiction that it goes with. Same thing, if you see somebody in the purple area, you're going to put them with the tally sheet that is correlated with that jurisdiction. We will be reviewing this on the morning of the count, and you'll have your maps in front of you, and you can ask us if you have any questions in person then. All right, so next few slides will be some samples of how to fill in your tally sheets. So on the bottom in red, this would be, you see one individual who looks to be about in their 30s on the street. So you'll go through and mark line number 1, fill in for male if the individual is a male. If the individual is a female, you can bubble F. T stands for transgender. U stands for unknown. So you would mark unknown if the individual is sleeping in a sleeping bag or has a hat on or a hood and you can't tell whether they're male or female. It's okay to put unknown. Then you select the age category that you are assuming they're in, and then you go over to the dwelling or vehicle type and you write where you saw them. Since this individual is on the street, you fill in the bubble for street. The next sample we have would be if you see a family. So this family is 2 adults and 1 child. So I marked here that line 1 would be male in the 25 to 54 category on the street. Second would be a female in the 25 to 54 category on the street. And then the third line is for the child, so under 18, female on the street. This, you'll see a column that says family. Only fill in those bubbles if you can tell that it's a family, and then you'll fill in the bubble for each line, and then we ask that you draw a circle around them. I don't imagine that you will find many families while out on the street. However, it's important to review this so that if you do, you can appropriately mark that they are a family. Next would be a sample of a vehicle. So I reviewed earlier some signs to look for vehicles who are inhabiting homeless individuals. Now I'm going to review what to do if you see one. So likely, if you see a vehicle, you won't necessarily know how many people are in there. So it's okay to just put one line and circle in a bubble for car. If you are able to see, if you're able to see 2 people and you can guess their gender and age, you can go ahead and fill in a line for each person and put car and fill in the bubble for car on each line. But this is an example of you being unable to tell how many people are inhabiting the vehicle, but you can tell that somebody's living in there and that you are seeing a car. Then on the back of your tally sheet, we ask that for that car, so line number one, you would put the last 4 digits of the license plate. We don't want all the digits of the license plate. This isn't a means of trying to track these cars down. This is solely for deduplication purposes. So when we go through and are processing the data, we'll make sure that the same car wasn't counted twice in case the car is moving around and going to multiple different census tract areas. The next sample would be if you see an encampment. So an encampment is defined as 2 or more tents or semi-permanent structures. So that, if you remember that picture I showed at the beginning of this slide, that is an example of an encampment. So these first lines 1 and 2, would be if you see 2 individuals standing outside or you're able to see them by their tents. 2 males, one is in the 25 to 54 category, one is in the 55 plus. They're both in tents and they're together in the same area. So that would qualify as an encampment. So then you go to the column on the right that says encampment, fill in those bubbles and circle that they are in an encampment together. That's one example. If you look down to lines 5 through 7, that would be another sample of an encampment. That would be if you see 3 tents together, you can't see anybody inside. However, there's tents that you can tell are inhabited tents. You just aren't sure how many people are inside. That also qualifies an encampment. So you can do a line for each tent, go ahead and fill in the column for encampment with a circle, and then you're done. So we just finished up reviewing some samples of the tally sheets. Again, we'll go over that on the day of the count. Next, we just have a few more slides here and then we'll be all done. I'm going to take a second to review the guide and volunteer roles for the day of the count of your team. We expect that the homeless guide, uses their knowledge to identify individuals experiencing homelessness. The guides bring the team towards locations and map assignments that are likely to have individuals experiencing homelessness. When you're handed your map, originally at the deployment center, you guys can work together to kind of go over the map. And then when you're out and about driving and walking up through all the streets, we hope that your homeless guide would be able to direct you to certain locations that are likely to maybe have somebody sleeping in them. The guide also helps distinguish between safe and potentially dangerous situations. The volunteer role is to provide consultation and support in team decisions. The volunteer is generally in charge of the transportation, and the volunteer helps ensure full coverage of the map assignment. We ask that the teams reach a consensus together on who will be in charge of the tally sheet to ensure correct methodology. So you guys can work together while you're out in the field as far as who's going to be filling in the bubbles when they see somebody on the street or in the tent or in a vehicle. That can be the guide or the volunteer, whatever system works best for you. Next, I'm going to go through some safety logistics and just a couple more slides, and then we'll be done. It's important that you are very safe and do not take any risks while out in the field. Like I mentioned before, this is a visual count only, so please do not approach individuals and ask them if they are homeless. Observe and tally only. Also, we want to make sure that you are not taking any photos while in the field. We want to respect these individuals' privacy, and we don't want them to think we're going to be doing anything with these photos. Also, we want to review and make sure you know that all information and locations that we collect on the day of the count will be kept confidential. This information is not discussed with outer groups after the count. Rather, it stays within our office and we process the data. It's important to stay with your teammate while you're out. Please don't separate. We ask that you stay together and keep track of each other and work together. We want to make sure that you're respectful of those individuals that you're counting. We want to remind you to call your deployment center captain if you have any problems or questions. Some more safety things to review. Don't enter abandoned buildings or other hard to access areas unless the team is familiar with those locations. So again, work together as the guide and volunteer to make a decision on what's the most safe route for you. Don't advertise your count location and keep information confidential post-count day. Again, this was where we want to remind you, if you see any encampments or you come across any tent areas, we don't want you to be sharing that information post-count. We want to respect those people's living accommodations. We'll review these safety protocols on the day of the count, and then, as always, while you're out in the field, call 911 if you have a true emergency. A couple things to review as far as preparation. You're going to want to try to wear comfortable shoes and clothes. You'll likely be out and about walking a lot. Dress warmly. You're out there early. As a volunteer, we ask that you bring a car if possible. Best to bring a charged cell phone that you can use while out in the field. You might want to bring a flashlight. You're going to be starting off pretty early in the morning, so some areas might be dark. A reminder that we'll be going out rain or shine. So bring an umbrella or raincoats if it's raining, and then get plenty of rest the night before. We'll be out there nice and early. You will be updated via email with any new information about the count, and then we have a 2017 Homeless PIT Count hotline if you have any questions, and that is through Applied Survey Research. The number is listed below, or you can also email Connie at appliedsurveyresearch.org if you have any questions from this training or any questions about where to go or what to do. But remember, we will review this training and the data collection protocols on the morning of the count when you arrive to your deployment center. Like I mentioned earlier, within the week or so before the count, we will email you with your deployment locations. If you are curious about that or need more information, feel free to reach out to this number or email when you're done with this. All right, that concludes our training for the 2017 point in time count. Thank you for your participation. We really appreciate your willingness and ability to volunteer on this important data collection process, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.